Oops, I accidentally tried to share it there. Haha. Okay. All right. So this is part 2 of chapter 10. Let's talk a little about what constitutes as public lands. And one major thing that's probably sticking out to you is national parks. Yes, absolutely. And national parks are basically large areas of land that have some kind of remarkable um, ecosystem present, natural event that occurs, like, waterfalls, things like that, that are just absolutely beautiful, or they have super awesome, cool, like landforms. So these have been set aside by the US government, and they are protected. Okay. Now, national parks are very, very important because they do aid in the protection of public lands and ecosystems for all sorts of different organisms. And they do absolutely help generate tourism. But one bad thing about national parks is that they have had to have moved indigenous people, such as Native Americans, out of some of these areas to set this land aside in some cases. All right, some other types of public lands are what we call the managed resource protection areas. And these can be US national forests. Um, if you think about the certain seashores, links of seashores, South Padre Island, some of those kinds of protected areas, those are all managed resources, and they are typically either managed on the federal level, sometimes state, but usually federal level. Then we can also have specific habitats that are managed. And especially if we're trying to like preserve a specific species or a habitat that is unlike any other. So these would be things like the Galapagos Islands, Madagascar, Ecuador, which has a very, very rich biodiversity. So these would be also examples of public lands. This map here kind of shows you where our US national forests and our grasslands are. Not a lot in Texas, mostly all out west, mostly. Um, mostly. The yellow, those are grasslands, and grasslands are actually they're looking to try to preserve more of the grasslands because they're realizing how important they really are for the biomes in which that they exist. We also have very strict nature reserves and wilderness areas. And some of these are, again, federal, some of them are state. Some of them are actually international as well, meaning that they have been set aside to help protect species and ecosystems. So it's kind of like the Galapagos Islands, but they tend to instead pinpoint a specific thing that people do. So, like the Great Barrier Reef, what they are looking at doing there is preventing, over snorkeling, too many people, tourism and that kind of stuff to help better protect that. So, protected landscapes and seascapes can be part of this, and as well as national monuments. So, national monuments don't always occur within like a national park. They can exist just as like a specific structure or representing a historic event or something like that. So Devil's Tower was it was the first of all the national monuments that was ever said, hey, this is a national monument. We need to protect this. And it's a pretty cool thing. If you don't know about it, I'm going to let you read up on it on your own time. It's a really cool formation of geology, but it was also extremely culturally important to a lot of different Native American tribes. All right, we've got a cool facts here. So we have a lot of land area, and almost 42% of it, almost half, is publicly held, especially out in the West. A lot of states out in the West, like Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, most of their land is public. It is not privately owned. It's kind of an interesting concept. And that we have more public land in our country than pretty much any other nation in the world. And of the publicly owned land, most of it is obviously owned by like the federal government, and you can see down here where the federal government has divided up most of its usage. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of cruise through a couple of points here. Public lands, and basically people, if you have a public land, like I was saying out like in Wyoming, basically everybody has rights to it, right? If you have that ability to go use that land, whether it's for hiking, whether it's for grazing cattle or whatever. But what they do is that they can set up multiple use areas. Say, hey, so this part over here, see that lake? That's cool. That's great for fishing. That's great for boating. That's great for water skiing, swimming, whatever. But this land that bumps up to it, that's great pasture land. So let's try to prevent those people who are utilizing the lake to go over and destroy the pasture land. There are 4 major federal agencies that help protect and manage those public lands. The Bureau of Land Management, oh wow, who would have thought that? U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. Yes, they are all different. Do you need to know exactly what each and every single one of them do? You don't need to absolutely memorize them, but you need to have an idea that obviously the Forest Service is going to focus on trees and timber, okay? All right, so let's talk about some of the different types, some of the other terminology that you might see. So when we talk about really open grasslands that is used mostly for cattle grazing or other types of animal raising, this is going to be what we call those rangelands. And there's a lot of this that is public use out in the West. Forests are obviously full of trees, but forests are largely used for timber. Some of them are privately owned, some of them are commercial, some of them are publicly owned. Again, as we saw in that very first slide. So let's kind of stick with this real quick. Let's talk about how do we harvest our timber. And this is important. This will probably be on your APES test somewhere. There's 2 major forms of harvest practices when it comes to getting timber for human use. One is what we call clear cutting. And that's what is going on in most of like the development, like out here on the far west side, northwest side, whenever they're building outwards from a city, like in the suburban areas, they will go and clear cut that land, take down all the trees, all of the vegetation, and basically level it. Okay, so that's clear cutting. If they do allow the regrowth, what they do is they plant all those the trees that they are going to plant all at one time. Typically, most of them are going to be very similar species, so they grow at the same rate. So that is clear cutting. Selective cutting is definitely probably much more sustainable, because what you're doing is you're going to go out and mark specific trees, harvest those specific trees, and then replant those trees. Then that allows a staggered growth of young and older trees within that forest. This is really, really well utilized in parts of Europe. They do this very successfully, and being able to sustain their forests very healthfully as well is through selective cutting. And we know, we've all heard about a lot of the wildfires, how they are becoming more intense. How that may be driven by changes in climate and weather and El Nino, La Nina, all that kind of stuff, especially out in California. Well, there's different types of fires. Okay. We can have what we call prescribed burns. And this will happen, especially around here in this part of the country. Farmers, ranchers will go out and, observe and like overwatch prescribed burns of their own property. And it's very well controlled, hopefully. And basically what it does is it kind of kills off a lot of the dead biomass that's not decomposing very well or has not done so. and it helps kind of expedite that process. Some plants, trees specifically, need that heat from some burning in order for their seeds to germinate. So prescribed burns can also help with that process as well. All right, so of the types of forests, if we were to do a prescribed burn, we might do it in a national park. We might do it in a national wildlife refuge, or we could do it in a national wilderness area. Do you need to know what all of these, like examples of all of them? No, not necessarily. You really don't. But you do need to know what this is, the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA or NEPA. Basically, what this does is it says that, hey, if you are going to come in and you're going to build something on this public land, we need to figure out what process is going to help make sure that it is done in a responsible manner. So that way we are protecting the resources that are there for now and in the future. So there's a lot of steps, and this is a very lengthy process. President Trump actually went in and shortened the time that it takes for certain things to undergo this NEPA process to determine whether or not certain projects can be accomplished and built and stuff like that, because he wanted to get certain things going and built and processed. It can take anywhere from a few months to 7, 10 years, decade, depending on the size of the project and the scope and sequence of it. So let me go back. So for every single one of these processes that they undergo, there's different steps. So they have to come up with an impact statement, identifying what is it going to do to the environment? Is it going to tear up an Arctic basin? Is it going to possibly pollute groundwater, whatever? Then how are they going to mitigate that? How are they going to go in and prevent that from happening, or mitigate any issues that do arise from that? Okay, last little bit on this one. Now let's quickly talk about residential land. We have what we call urban, obviously, in the cities. We have suburban, which is just outside of those metropolitan centers. So right around Clark, you have Chavano Park. You have Castle Hills. Bernie is really more considered to be suburban anymore. Then you have also what we call exurban, but they are not necessarily connected to any central city or densely populated area like the Woodlands, right, which is outside Houston. To kind of look at where we're going with this, you can see that as time has gone by, the amount of rural land has decreased. The amount of urban land has increased slightly, but what has really skyrocketed in the last 50, 60 years is the amount of suburban population in terms of where people are living. People love the suburbs. And yeah, things are an easy, there's a drive, but it's not so far of a drive. It's safer. There's not as much crime as there are in some of the inner urban areas. But you're not so far out of town like your rural, where that your Walmart's not an hour and a half away. So that brings us to the last topic here of urban sprawl. So urban sprawl is whenever areas become urbanized. So Bernie is a great example of urban sprawl. New Braunfels, yes. They are thinking that the whole corridor between Austin all the way down here to San Antonio could all become one big suburban line. And that would all be a huge example of urban sprawl, especially because it's along I-35 and there's all of that roadway there. Since there's that roadway there, it's easy access. And zoning is allowed there for you to have to build all sorts of different things, commercial buildings as well as residential. Right. So you do need to kind of have an idea as to the concept of urban sprawl and what goes into it. All right. So keep that in your mind. So whenever we go through and we experience urban sprawl, people leave the inner city to go out. And that's usually because there's newer construction. It may be nicer in terms of safety or schools or something that's very attractive to people like that. But as that happens, then the inner city tends to decline because there's not as many people that have the means to upkeep and help monitor and protect those areas. So, and as people move out to the suburbs, then we have issues such as longer commutes. People are having to drive more. So therefore, that there's more roadway. So then you are also clearing out more land. So see where I'm going with this? So urban sprawl is a thing, and we are seeing it right here in San Antonio big time.